Fund, Tourism Improvement District Fund, Impact Fee Funds, and Debt Service Funds. A reminder, the public can provide public comment by emailing publiccomment@yville.com, and we are monitoring that throughout the meeting. So with that, who's going to kick it off, Steve?
I will start with a brief overview. Thank you, Mayor and Council. On behalf of the town's management team and our entire organization, we're very pleased to present what we believe is a very encouraging budget coming out of the 19-20 COVID pandemic and how it's impacted the current budget. So we're excited in the sense that this proposed budget maintains our core services as they have been throughout. We have not had a diminishment in our service level as a result. It maintains our staffing. It does continue what we did last year. Our discretionary distributions to interfund service transfers are not being made. Those include OPEB, PERS, pension UAL, and our equipment reserves for fleet and facility funds 81 and 82. We're excited because there's some movement on our revenue projections, so we're continuing to fine tune those. But the proposed budget, as it is shaping up, only is going to require a nominal amount potentially from the Revenue Stabilization Fund. Even more exciting is the potential that if the trend on TOT continues, we may also only be needing to use a small amount from the Revenue Stabilization Fund for the current fiscal year. So with that caveat, you will see some increased expenditures, and I'm going to point out that that should be expected because of the level of decreases we had last year as we start restoring a few elements. One of the major elements that will be restored at a slight level across the board includes the investment in employee council education training and a little bit of workshop and conference travel as those functions will be able to resume. And you will also see some increases from what has actually happened in the Parks and Rec programming as we're able to resume. We have a modest or reduced level of capital projects, in part due to recognizing the budget constraints and staying within that. So the capital projects will principally be dominated by our revenue, by our utility enterprise and restricted funds such as Measure T. So with that, I'm excited to turn the meeting over to our finance director and those of us that are managing the various general fund departments as we go through. I think you're going to find today's presentation also interesting because we will be visually also introducing our work with an online budget document and OpenGov. So really on behalf of your management team, we are very excited that we're in this fiscal position. We're excited to show you what we've been doing with OpenGov, and we look forward to your input, feedback, and direction regarding the budget process.
Thank you, Town Manager. So before getting started, since this is only our second year of having a virtual workshop, I just wanted to review how it will proceed. So I will be sharing my screen and going through the PowerPoint slides, and then each department head or staff person will be addressing their individual slides. And if there are questions, will remain on that slide until questions are through. If there is a discussion that stems from that slide, I'll go ahead and stop sharing so we can kind of have more of a conversation, and then we'll go back to sharing. So with that, I'll go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully everyone will be able to see budget workshop number 2. And I'll get right into some numbers for the general fund financial status. So we have to date collected $2.5 million in TOT. We did reduce our original budget for this revenue down to $4.25 million. So that is the target we are hoping to reach by the end of this fiscal year. Sales tax looks to be on track to hit our lowered amended budget amount. And we have received quite a bit extra property tax than we had originally budgeted. So that is encouraging, because it will help kind of fill the gap of the TOT losses that we have incurred due to COVID. We also are expecting $279,000 of American Rescue Plan revenue. And then we do have our buckets of reserves that can be used if needed to, again, fill the gaps of revenue losses. The $2.8 million assigned for Yountville Elementary School purchase, $2 million, little over $2 million each in the emergency reserve and the revenue stabilization fund, and then a total of $1.2 million in budget contingency and unassigned fund balance in the general fund. So on the other side of that slide, two of our major revenue predictions for next fiscal year, we are estimating $5.25 million for TOT, which was our original budget for 2021. And obviously we had to bump that down a little bit, but I think the town manager and I both feel pretty confident that seeing the trends starting to increase in TOT revenue, that we think that that's a pretty reachable target for 21-22. We also increased our original sales tax revenue projection that was outlined in the budget parameters at budget workshop number 1 in February. We originally were thinking about $1 million for our sales tax, and after a review with HDL, our sales tax auditor, we have increased that to 1.2 for sales tax in 21-22. Moving on to some variables in the general fund that will or have the potential to increase general fund revenue. Internal sources will be savings generated from departmental expenses as we move towards the end of the fiscal year and we see where departments have been able to be within or under budget that could generate some savings. We did request a draw in the current fiscal year of $26,000 from Parsac dividends, and we will be requesting another draw of $60,000 in fiscal year 21-22. And then also the utilization of the OPEB and PERS UAAL trust funds. Those will be relieving the general fund of spending general fund revenues as we use those funds to pay for retiree health premiums and our annual PERS UAAL that we pay to CalPERS. Externally, there could be some excess ERAF, which is Educational Revenue Augmentation Funds, from Napa County. This is not ever budgeted for because it is unpredictable. But if we do receive some at the end of this fiscal year or in next fiscal year, that will just increase the amount of general fund revenue available. If we receive more than expected sales tax in the second quarter of 21, so that would be the July through September period, and any additional federal or state assistance if it becomes available. One thing that is not listed here that is worth noting is also property taxes. We are currently estimating $2 million for fiscal year 21-22. And we're taking a little closer look at our property tax base and seeing if that could possibly be increased by 100,000 or so. So once we do a little bit more analysis, we will come back at budget workshop number 3 and let the council know if we think that that should be increased a bit. So for some budget tightening measures that we have taken not only in fiscal year 2021, but also are extending into 21-22. Again, use of the 2 trust funds to pay retiree medical premiums and the annual UAAL really makes sense in this economic environment. It is the intended purpose of these trust funds. They cannot be used for anything else. So it's just very logical to use them as we are experiencing lower general fund revenues. And also these funds are very healthy. They still continue to accrue monthly interest. So even with some utilization, they continue to grow. We are continuing the temporary suspension of contributions to these trusts and also to the internal repair and replacement funds. And that that could change at the end of the year. If we do see that we have any unassigned fund balance, council can decide to make a contribution to the trusts or to the replacement funds if they think it is appropriate. We are conducting a review of need before filling part-time positions, and also the employee associations agreed to forego the cost of living adjustment for fiscal year 21-22. All right, so these are, we like to outline some of these common themes that you will see reflected in all departments that include salary and benefit costs, so that it doesn't have to keep being repeated, and it will be known that these are affecting all of those departments. Total PERS costs are over $698,000. That does include both the normal payroll contributions and the PERS UAAL that we pay in July. We do have a reduction of the classic employees, as we have had some retirements in the recent fiscal years. So we are now at 12 employees in the classic tier, 3 employees in tier 2, and then 16 employees in the PEPRA tier. So as you can see, there's quite a shift of full-time employees to that second and third tier, which is a cost savings to the town. Overall, PERS costs have increased about 4%, and this is due to the PERS UAAL that last year was $276,000, and this year has grown by about 17%. Again, no cost of living adjustment for fiscal year 21-22. We're assuming a 7% increase in health insurance. Dental did go down just a little bit by about 1%. Suspension of OPEB and PERS UAL costs. So when we're looking at those department line items, you will not see amounts in those line items, and that is what is causing some of the personnel costs to be lower. Also with personnel costs, we are distributing all employees' costs over their departmental allocations. So there has been a bit of a shift in some of the costs, such as cell phone allowance or health in lieu payments. Rather than being coded to one main department, they are distributed by each employee's percentage to each department. So you may see historical zeros in that department, and then in fiscal year 21-22 see a cost. We have had some turnover and some reduced part-time seasonal staffing needs, and there is a slight increase to allocated IT costs that will affect each department.
So Celia, Councilmember Knight has a question. I'll invite the question now. Typically, we're going to try to get through the entire section, and then we'll ask questions, but if it's pertinent right now, Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Mayor, and that's fine. I just was, as a new person to this process, I appreciate this report is just delightful. It's amazing. But Celia, as you maybe first introduce terms like the PERS UAAL, if you could just briefly explain that an acronym to those that are listening, and then just the first time, and then the public listening will maybe understand that an acronym. So thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So that is the CalPERS unfunded actuarially accrued liability. And so we will go a little bit more in depth in this when we get to that specific slide, but this is an amount that is calculated by CalPERS each year, and is basically the difference between the amount of our asset with CalPERS and the amount of their calculated liability for all the plan members. So there is a bit of a gap in the funding, and so they amortize that over a 20-year period, and each year we make a payment towards that. So that is a little bit about what that is, and then we'll get a little more overview when we get to that slide, if that is helpful.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So back to general fund. So the info on the next couple of slides, the next 3 slides, comes from the very first page of that general fund summary. So this is a bit of a dissection of the data on that page, starting with some fund balance activity and a high-level snapshot of revenues, expenditures, and transfers. So if we go over to this last column and look at the 21-22 proposed, we can see a little over 10 million expected in revenues, 8.7 million of expenditures, and then a total net transfers of 979,000. So we're hoping to end that fiscal year with a positive fund, or a positive an excess after transfers. So that excess deficiency row, another way to look at that is as a use of fund balance or a growth of fund balance. So you'll see in the estimated 2021 column that we have a deficiency of 972,000. What that means is that revenues are not going to be able to cover expenditures. So that is where we would need to dip into that fund balance that has been set aside to help us cover that gap. So the budget contingency and the unassigned fund balance, and that will help to bring that deficiency up to hopefully a zero. So in fiscal year 21-22, we project not having a deficiency, which is good. Another thing to point out on this slide is that that red asterisk with that negative 5 million of deficiency. What that truly is a movement of fund balance, and it's outlined down in that note where we transferred 1.7 million to the Housing Opportunity Fund, 500,000 each to funds 2, 3, 81, and 82. That's the OPEB, the PERS, and the fleet and facility replacement funds. And then also 2 million each into the emergency reserve and the revenue stabilization fund. So rather than looking at that as a deficiency, what it truly was a movement of fund balance. Any questions on this slide?
I'd like us to try to get through the presentation and then go back to questions so that we keep momentum going.
No problem.
Unless there's something very specific that council needs clarification on, but I'd like to have you go through and then we'll come back.
Okay, great. So next we have a little bit more in-depth view of our transfers. In fiscal year 21-22, you can see that there is still a need for some revenue stabilization utilization. The good news is in 2021, we are predicting we'll need about 200,000 rather than the 1 million that was originally budgeted. So that is a positive. And then we do have an increased transfer to the Housing Opportunity Fund of $70,000. And another thing that could possibly reduce the amount of revenue stabilization reserve fund needed is that transfer to capital projects. It's currently at 200,000, and it's possible that upon review, we could reduce that down to 100,000, which will reduce that $150,000 need from the reserve. The last slide of general fund summary is for fund balance allocation. So here we see how we divvy up all the amounts from our full fund balance into different buckets, if you will. We are able to set aside a budget contingency of about $438,000. We did increase the leave buyout from 200,000 to 250,000. Reason being is that the state has mandated recently, I think it was a year or two ago, that that we have to pay out employees for any accruals at the end of the year that have not been used, rather than a kind of a use it or lose it basis. We are liable to pay them out. So rather than budgeting for that, we are using a fund balance allocation so that at the end of the year, we see how much is actually needed for that payout, and then we use what is assigned for that leave buyout to cover that cost. We are able to still have 2.8 million set aside for the potential purchase of the YES property, and we do expect to have a little bit of an unassigned fund balance at the end of fiscal year 21-22. A little bit more about our our buckets for how we respond to potential emergency, as we are currently doing. Again, budget contingencies, we will have 438,000 set aside, 200,000 for legal contingencies, and then the two reserve funds, revenue stabilization set aside at 25% of TOT revenue, that is per the policy minimum, and emergency reserve at the policy minimum of 20% of general fund operating expenditures. And lastly, just to touch on the status of the two trusts, the OPEB trust, other post-employment benefit trust, we will be utilizing $144,000 for the retiree health insurance. The balance as of March 31st is over $5.2 million. For the UAAL PERS trust, we will again be using $324,000. The balance of that trust is $2.7 million, and discretionary contributions to both of those trusts have been suspended for one more fiscal year. Right, so at this point, we are ready to move on to each department. If there
Yeah, I'll ask now if there are any council questions about this section that we've just covered. I see Councilor Dornbecker and then Vice Mayor.
My question is just that, can we please have these slides sent to us individually as well? Thank you.
Absolutely, yes.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you. Thank you for the report, Director King. Of the 2.6 million TOT we've collected versus the 4.2 million we've budgeted, is that a timing issue because of collection of TOT?
Yes, in part. So yes, we've only collected revenue for TOT through the last reporting period was March. No, I apologize. The last reporting period was February, which was reported at the end of March and received in April. So we will continue to collect TOT revenue through August, actually, because the June reporting period will be reported in July, and we will receive that revenue in August. So we won't truly know how close we got to that 4.25 million until we receive the final June reporting period in end of July, beginning of August.
So we're expecting to collect the delta between 4.2 and 2.6 from our actual TOT in March, April, May, and June, those 4 months.
Correct. I think that there will be a gap there, and that is where the unassigned fund balance and budget contingency fund balance allocation will come in, because if we do not get that extra almost $2 million in the next couple of months, that's where we're going to need to use the fund balance allocations to cover that revenue loss.
And Vice Mayor,
thank you.
If I can add, when you look at our TOT reports, you will note that we track them by different months generate historically a different rate. So there's not an even distribution. So I think, for all of the council, if you look at the targets, it is, we believe, reasonable that we are going to be very close and probably just under that projection. But we have very encouraging news, because all of the TOT reports up through and including the very good March report that we just shared with you, the Bellagio was not open at that time period. So we are now going forward April, May, June with the whole inventory that the town has. So we're very concerned as well, but we do feel that that target is going to be close. And then, as the finance director has indicated, we've had some belt tightening in some areas that have generated some additional revenue, property tax. We'll see where we at. Our commitment to you has been that we're always going to use only the necessary amount from the revenue stabilization fund. And we are very positive that it's not going to be anywhere near the 1 million that was originally projected.
Thank you.
And just to back up just real quick, I misspoke, and I think I said that we have collected through February. Actually, March TOT has been reported. So we will be waiting for April, May, and June to be reported and collected.
One question I have before we go on to the next section is related to the 2.8 million that's set aside for the Yountville Elementary School potential acquisition. If that money is not used for the acquisition of the property or a portion of the acquisition of the property, do we have a plan for reallocation of that, or are we just going to deal with that when there is a reality of the outcome?
That is a great question, Mayor. And I think right now the best way to describe that fund is it's an earmark towards that purpose. If that changes or the amount is different, then you are correct. Then the council has the positive situation of getting to reallocate and determine where that fund balance might go. So right now I would think of it more as an earmark, and if things change, then you will redistribute it at a different time.
Right, and we heard yesterday from our Measure S rep, Hillary Tripp, that we have a 900,000+ in the Measure S monies that I think we'll probably be hearing about later, that may relate to the school site if there's any affordable housing component there, but we don't know that yet. So I'm putting that out there because we heard about 900,000+ yesterday for affordable housing, and we're talking about land acquisition. And I don't want there to be any premature expectations, but just a little clarification there. So, okay, great. So I think we can move on to the next section.
Okay. First department will be Town Council Mayor, and we'll go to Town Clerk Michelle Gummy.
Thank you. One announcement before we get started for our viewers at home. If you would like to submit a public comment on any of the general fund departments or items going forward, please go ahead and use our public comment at yville.com email to submit those comments, and we'll be checking those throughout the presentation. And thank you for that. And turning back to the Town Council Mayor General Fund Department, total budget.
Sorry to interrupt. Before you move on, we will not be, if we receive public comments after an item has been covered, we may not be referencing it back to a previous section. So yes, if in real time we're getting submittals during that section, we will reference that public comment. If it comes after that section, it will be added to the record, but it may not be recognized in our meeting in real time.
Thank you. That was an important clarification, Mayor. That is correct. Town council budget is up by 2.6% due to increase in meetings and training. And we have all 5 council members who will be participating in various levels and league items and other meetings that will necessitate those costs. And we hope that we will be actually attending those things in the future. Budget highlights for Town Council include conducting the annual council planning retreat and strategic plan check-in. Also to hold a public workshop regarding emergency preparedness. And we hope to host the Board and Commission Volunteer Appreciation Dinner, the annual Resident Bash, and the Employee Appreciation Event. I will turn it over to Finance to take a peek at our exciting new OpenGov feature, and looking forward to that. And we'll be available for questions.
Okay, so just for the council's benefit, which I think you may have already seen because they were links in the staff reports, but also the viewers, this is what our online budget will be looking like for each department. They will have their narrative, and then the department expenditures outlined. Some of them have pictures at the bottom, and some have other components such as an org chart or maybe a debt repayment schedule. So just a quick glimpse here, and then we'll see some other examples as we continue on through the PowerPoint.
Thank you. And you saw in Finance Director King's presentation there that the breakdown of individual budget numbers are outlined in that area. So if there are any questions, please let me know.
I see none, so let's just keep moving unless I see a hand, and then we'll pause.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council members. I am introducing the non-departmental budget for the fiscal year 2021-2022. And in this general fund budget is down 1.7%, leaving it flat. And part of the decrease is due to the dissolution of the sub-RHNA regional planning effort, which will save the town $25,000. This budget also includes $18,500 for the post office lease fee and $6,000 in funding for anticipated costs of the town's share in the Napa County-wide Climate Action Committee. And that's what we have so for this budget. Do you have any questions? If not, I can move forward.
I will just keep going unless I call out a question. I see the Vice Mayor does have one.
This is just a housekeeping matter under the accomplishments. I'm not sure if those got dropped in from maybe town council and mayor, just something for you all to please look at out offline and make sure that that's in the right spot in our budget book. Thank you.
Got it?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so information technology and communications will be presented by Julie Baldia.
Hey, good morning, Mayor and Council. Hopefully you can hear me well. I was kind of going in and out a bit. So the information technology budget has a 14% increase this year. And the cause of this increase is because over the last year or year and a half or so, we've been working to implement Laserfish. We've implemented OpenGov, Prime Work, which is a work order software. So once those projects are implemented and then those budget amounts transfer over to the IT department for maintenance. So I will pay those maintenance costs out of. So that is the cause of this increase this year. We, as you know, that causes for a lot of the flexibility in this department from year to year. Some years it's up, some years it's down based on where we're at with our projects. We are trying to move as much of our server support and network environment to the cloud as those options become available to us. It sort of, reduces our carbon footprint, and we are able to take advantage of all the securities that are offered for that. So other than that, there is no major projects coming up this year. It's status quo otherwise. I'm happy to answer any questions.
And I like the fact that you staged that little harmonica sound of your audio to make it clear that we need to invest in our IT. That was very, very sly of you. I see no hands, so let's continue.
Okay, just a quick look at this online budget. The fun thing about this budget is you do have the line items and then also a nice little graph that is a nice visual for users to see how those costs are allocated. All right, moving on.
Right, so for community promotion and programs, the budget has an increase of 4% due to the inclusion of $10,000 for the phase 2 of the electric leaf blower incentive program, and the 2% increase in the Chamber of Commerce 3-year contract. The budget will also maintain $6,000 in funding for emergency preparedness programming as we progress into reopening. And the only outstanding question is whether the council would like to include funding for the small projects grant program, and we would like direction from council on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think this is a good time to mention that there's a lot of emergency preparedness money that we're hearing about the state and federal level. What I would expect is that we'd be adding to, not replacing, the budget commitments that we're seeing here. And that might go for other areas of funding as well, that as we get relief from the state and the federal governments, I think that's in some cases going to be adding to, not replacing. And
Absolutely.
maybe Steve, you want to mention?
Yeah, I just was going to say, staff is monitoring the various programs and activities that are coming out both from the state, and that conversation will also be similar to the potential federal infrastructure investment. So you're absolutely correct that we will be monitoring these programs to see if any of them are appropriate and or we're eligible. We need to also evaluate what it is they need us to do, but staff is aware of that and we're excited. And if we're successful, that would be very similar to what we did a couple meetings ago, where we added money from the grants and then we added to the expenditure for the program. But you're absolutely correct that there is going to be a significant, not all of those programs for fire were eligible, because while we're surrounded by what is considered a high hazard, Yountville itself is not a high hazard. So we just have to look at things, but it is encouraging, and I do think there may be some grant funding for preparedness planning. So we are prepared to monitor and move if successful.
And just to be very clear, we're not going to add in budget areas that don't need it. We're still recovering from significant loss from the last year. So there may be other areas, if the colors of money are appropriate, to be able to reallocate funds. But I just want to mention, in some cases we're going to augment, and in some cases we may be able to reallocate. So to be determined in the future. Councilmember Knight, question?
Thank you, Mayor. I would just I'm looking at the fund 1015, the breakout, and currently there's no proposed funding for the Happiness Project grant line 4985 that we talked about. I know at our recent meeting about Vice Mayor and Councilmember Dorenbecker interested in continuing that program. So I have a question about that, and then maybe some more detail about what's funded in 4990 community outreach, and maybe those funds are available for that.
Thank you, Mayor.
And just a sec, Steve, I believe that's what Eddie was just asking us about. He called it the small projects. It's not the happiness fund, it's the small projects fund now. Started out as a happiness fund, if I'm correct, Steve. But yes, I believe that's what Eddie was asking for council guidance.
To support on both of those. One, I'll answer the question. Community outreach, Council Member Knight, that covers the cost of mailers, alerts, and things like that we have to be, we put out to inform and educate people. So it's a working budget for that cost. The question really is, the council was split on how to proceed with or what level of funding for the small projects. So as Eddie mentioned, that's really a question. This is one of those areas where we do need some direction if you want to put 10,000 back in for that. And then if so, we'll work with the committee. So that we need direction from the council on that.
And what I would just remind the council also is that we set aside a certain dollar amount and only received a few viable projects. And while the concept was a positive concept, the execution on it was very limited, I believe. And so there was an expectation, if you put 10,000 or 5,000 or whatever it is, that money will be, it's like guaranteed to be spent. But that's not the way we operate. If it's appropriate, we spend it. So the question, I guess, is, should we just allow special or small projects to be brought forward for consideration, and we consider them one at a time, as opposed to having a budget set aside and then see if we get any appropriate projects? Because we did have limited appropriate projects when we had the money budgeted. Mayor? Yes.
Thank you. Just maybe then a big picture question. I guess I'm asking, at some point, when would be a good time to have a discussion about this? At a strategic planning, a retreat to talk about this? Would interest me. I noticed in our mail in the last couple of weeks, we received a letter from Michelle Group from the Cope Family Center about communities supporting local nonprofits. And so, and in the past, I've talked about I've thought about the idea of possibly doing at some point as we come out of COVID, a government open day to show off the work that the town has done in this open gov system. So I guess I'm wondering at some point, when would be a good time to have a conversation about community promotion? I know we're on a limited time today for that. So
yeah, and we have had multiple conversations about the community nonprofit grant program, which we determined we would end after getting expectations from nonprofit organizations that had really no connection to Yountville residents. In some cases, it became, I think, fairly staff time intensive to be trying to manage that program, and we ultimately decided that we would not continue it, and that we would. There are some organizations that are receiving funding through the Tourism Improvement District if there is coordination and appropriateness there. If the council has changed its position on nonprofit grant funding, that is it might be a longer conversation than today. I know that we do receive occasional requests, but oftentimes they're either national or regional and really not connected to our residents specifically.
Well, thank you. I just at some point would be interested in a conversation about community promotion, but maybe we could talk about that at our council retreat and strategic planning meeting. Thank you.
And I do think that would be appropriate at that time, because I think it's got a policy connection to it, not just a budget connection. And also we have to talk through, is this the time that we should be looking at discretionary funding like that as we're recovering from significant loss and shortfalls? If we decide, yes, now is a good time, then I think we can make that decision. But we do have a strategic planning meeting coming up this month, so I think that would be appropriate to discuss at that time. After these budget workshops, we determine that we have some unallocated funding that we have a better sense of how much that might be also at that time.
Thank you.
I don't see any other hands, so if we can continue. Oh, Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I just wanted to talk for a minute about the small project / happiness. I haven't had a chance to coordinate with my colleague, Councilmember Dornbecker, on this, but I think one reason we didn't fund it last year was we were in budget straits, and also COVID kept us inside. I'm kind of thinking this year people may, and I agree with you, Mayor, we didn't get as much buy-in as we wanted, but the things that did come about were quite fun. The art boxes, the bubbles, there were a number of fun things that happened. I don't think we need 10,000, and I don't think it will really start up for a few more months. I'm thinking maybe 3,000 to be put in. And as you say, if it doesn't get spent, then we have it at the end of the year. If it does, it's really a minimal placeholder to just maybe try to start re-engaging our folks to get out and about and do some things.
Okay. I can support that idea. It shows an interest in the council to have those kind of recommendations brought forward without a significant restriction on funding. And if we say 3,000 as you're suggesting, and we get a long list of great projects, then we can reevaluate and take it out of Samantha's budget. Just kidding. Just making sure you were listening. So I think, right, if the council agrees with the Vice Mayor's recommendation, we can offer that.
On that, we will put 3,000 in there.
I just want to make sure the council is in agreement.
That's
okay. Councilmember Knight using his reaction button very effectively, and Councilmember Dornbecker, I like it. Here we are, a year plus into it, and we're We're getting a hang of the Zoom thing. Okay, so Eddie, you have direction for 3,000 in that small projects.
I do, thank you, and I will be adding that into the budget.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. Now, Councilmember Dornbeck,
Town manager.
you can't turn down her thumbs up. If you click on the same thing, there you go. We got it. Okay. We're good. Next.
Go ahead,
Are we
Julie.
ready? Okay. Okay. So town manager's department, it is actually a lower budget than previous years, and this is due to salary and medicated benefits allocated differently this year, and we've had some reduction. So other than that, there's not a lot of activity. The training, the meetings and training budget, we're hopeful that we are actually able to attend these trainings that we were not last year. So we shall see. So there's not a lot going on in this budget this year.
The other thing that does need to be highlighted is that part of the personnel cost shift is as a result of our succession planning efforts towards the succession of the town clerk, who has announced her retirement. So you'll see some movement of the management fellow into an acting deputy clerk for the first 6 months of that budget while we prepare for that succession. And then you'll also see that obviously in the town clerk budget.
Correct.
I see no hands.
Hello, everybody. I'll take on the finance department this year. So the total budget for the next budget year is $557,308. That's about a 5% decrease from prior fiscal year, and about a $30,000 decrease. This is mostly due to transitioning our $32,500 OpenGov budgeting solution software from the finance department to the IT department per our town budget policy, as we start allocating that across other departments. Besides our salaries and benefits, the largest budgeted items are for our contract services and for audit, accounting, and services. We use our contract services budget to pay for our financial consultant services, as well as to pay for HDL, which is our sales tax management partners. And then our audit and accounting services budget, of course, is for auditors, for both of our townwide audit as well as our TOT audit.
Okay. Next.
Okay. For risk management and general fund, it's a flat budget. We continue to work with PARZAC, managing our workers' compensation, liability, property insurance. We also continue our training efforts for Cassidy Whitmore for a lot of employee training and development, risk management. We hope to have our annual Emergency Operations Center training this year. We have not been able to have that, so we're hopeful that we can move forward with that this year. And otherwise, there is really no change to this budget.
Just a quick, it was mentioned earlier.
Happy to answer any questions.
It was mentioned by the finance director. Also, our relationship with PARSAC has refunded through the dividends $26,000 for this year and $6,000. So as we transition from PARSAC to CIRA as the merger with the adjacent Redwood Empire risk pool, so some positive benefits from our relationship there.
A question from the Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Could you go into a little more detail, please, on the $36,300 for contract services? Because I noticed, although that's flat from last year, the previous years it had been 11 or 12,000. So we're tripling that, and I would just like a little data on that, please.
One moment, please.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Okay, well, Julie, while you're looking for that, I'll ask Michelle or Eddie if we have received any public comment on any of the sections of this.
Thank you, Mayor. No, we have not.
And Mayor, I'm happy to discuss offline with Ms. Baldia if that is better. I don't question it. I just want to know what it's comprised of.
Yeah, that's since it's not immediately available, let's have Julie share it with the entire council. And if there are any other questions at the end of the budget or the workshop today, we may follow up. We have some other follow-ups as well.
We can work on that, but as Mayor, as you've also pointed out, this is one of those where if some of those expenses don't occur, then the fund balance is, it is returned. But we'll get you a better understanding of what's driving the increase.
Yeah, so let's just have if we have questions to be answered, let's do that together at the end, and instead of one-off emails to the council. That could also be clarified.
I will remind you all that when we do that, we communicate and share the information with the whole council. So
no, I mean one answer at a time. Let's just list all the questions we have at the end of the workshop, and then there could be one email to the council with all the questions being answered, rather than one question and answer per email, unless I've talked long enough that Julie found the answer.
I did actually. So those contract services include employee training and development, which is part of PARS Act through Liebert Cassidy, and that's also for all employees, not just the town manager's office. Our PARS Act safety grant, we also spend that money. We are eligible for a grant up to about $7,000 a year. And so when we do those for various things throughout the year, we actually submit reimbursement to PARS Act and are reimbursed that money. So we have to budget for it, and then we are reimbursed back for it. The other thing is we've also included for the annual EOC training in that budget. And every year we have Liebert Cassidy do some Affordable Care Act analysis for us. We have a contract with this My Safety Officer that provides tailgate meetings and trainings for all of our public work employees on a regular basis. And it also covers our annual consortium dues with Liebert Cassidy Whitmore as well.
Thank you.
And as Steve mentioned, I'm sorry?
I said, thank you. You found it.
Okay. Took a second.
It's
a new software, so I got to learn from it.
I'm sorry. May I? Could you please send it to us anyway? I couldn't keep up with you and get all the notes down.
Sure.
And part of it is a recoverable because we do get some funding, so that's revenue in, and then we have to budget the expenditure out. So we will get that, but it sounds like we have the answer. If I
Yes, and Julie will follow up to share it with the council.
I'll send you all an email.
Great, thank you.
Right, for the town attorney department, this fiscal year, the upcoming fiscal year, the town attorney budget will remain the same at $195,000 plus $1,500 for office supplies.
Okay. Town clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. Town clerk department, the total budget is down from estimated current year expenditures by about 8% due to one-time large expense for conducting the November 3rd, 2020 general municipal election. So as council members know, every other budget cycle, we have an increase in that election line item. And budget highlights for the town clerk include, in addition to the reduction for election costs, it also includes the transferring of the PrimeGov and annual renewal of the contract to the IT budget, which is part of our IT policy. After 1 year implementation, it moves to the IT budget for maintenance. We will continue with our records management program in scanning, indexing, and developing workflows within that system, and working with departments to continue adding things to their records retention file plans. And then we will also, Steve may speak to the personnel costs to reflect succession plannings that will take place in the fiscal year 2021-22. And for me, that concludes my report, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And I think Steve already referenced that adjustment that will be necessary for the transition period.
Yes.
What I'll just highlight is whomever it is that's going to be coming in after you is going to be really lucky, because there's been so much record retention, updating of records, and so much transition into the new century that we've been doing under your leadership. We're gonna have to find things for the new clerk to do.
Yes, well, thank you. It's with council support and the town manager support that since I started working here back in 2006, that we have implemented a majority of our technology programs that will improve the clerk's department and ultimately reach out to impact all of the departments in a positive way. So I appreciate that support over the years. Thank you.
That's why your proclamation was so long. You had like a dozen things to list, but yeah, thank you. Okay, we can move on. Are we going to OPEB next? Yes.
Next is OPEB, and I have the next few slides here. So OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. And for the town, that means our retiree health benefits. So this is the fund that we use to account for the funding and costs of all of our retiree health benefits. And usually there's two major costs associated with this funds. The first one is the premiums paid for our current retirees, and that gets pulled from our payroll every time we process payroll. And then the second is the annual contribution that we make to the OPEB trust for funding future retiree benefits. But of course, for this year, that second, the annual contribution, like Celia talked about earlier, we're still suspending that. So we're not going to be making any additional contributions to our OPEB fund, but we are, of course, still going to be making our existing retiree medical premium payments. So for this year, that amount is $144,000. And the total balance as of March 31st in our actual trust fund is about 5.5 million. And this amount, per the town's investment policy, gains interest every year. So between July 2020 and March 2021, the trust gained a net amount of about $850,000 in interest earnings. Any questions about OPEB?
I see no hands.
Okay, and just a quick look at the OPEB online budget book page. We do show the revenue and transfers, any expenditures, which would be an allocation to the trust or those retiree health insurance premiums, the balance of the fund activity. And then we do have, and this will be updated at the end of the year, we do show the trust activity. So the earnings, expenditures, distributions. And then we can also have links within our text up here. So we are considering working on a page on the finance website that does talk more in depth about OPEB. So we can also point people from this budget document to the finance page that will talk more about OPEB. So that will be an addition to this page.
Thank you. Councilmember Knight, question?
Thank you. This, just a general clarification. I was just curious to see if in the future somehow when I'm looking at Fund 02 or Fund 03, we see the budget lines and the line items, but in the summary page before, you let us know that the balance for PARS UAL is 2.7, and so I was just wondering at some point in the future on this department page, if the actual fund balance could be reported, so that when we're looking at the actuals and proposed, that we're also able to see the current fund balance. And so it would be helpful for me. Thank you.
Definitely. I know historically we add the fund balance in like the budget highlights section. And the purpose of this actual fund is just to show the accounting for our trust fund. So I know that's kind of confusing, but that's why we don't see the and for OPEB, the balance is actually 5.5 million. That's in the OPEB trust fund. But again, that's not held in Fund 2, because Fund 2 is just to show the accounting, how much are we going to transfer? How much are we going to pay out of it? But so usually we show a line item that just shows, in our OPEB trust fund balance, we have that 5.5 million.
And just to add, once we add that page on the town website about more in-depth information about OPEB, we do plan to update that monthly each time we get the monthly statement, so that will reflect the current fund balance of the trust.
Thank you. It's just so important for the community to see the work this council has done over the last 3 or 4 years to set aside funds for retirement that many other communities have not been able to do. And so on a summary page, like for Fund 2, Department 1900, when there's room below it to just emphasize the fund balance, I think it's important to be able to see that all together as we propose. So thank you. And it's, it's just remarkable the work the council's been able to do to set aside funds for expenses that will be occurring maybe long past when we're not here. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Councilmember Knight. We have been proactively paying into our obligations for years. And as you noted, most cities can't do that. And unfortunately, many cities are approaching serious financial trouble, even risking bankruptcy because of their inability to fund their obligations. And so it is one of those things that's a little bit of an intangible because it is in the future, but the obligations are there today. And so sometimes it's hard for the general public to appreciate that. It's a different budget allocation line item. And so it's not about spending money now to have something that we build or fix or whatever today. So this is future, and it's sometimes a little bit harder to grasp. So thank you for that recognition. Councilmember Moeller?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I don't want to mislead the public. It hasn't been over the last 2 or 3 years. It's really been over the last more than a decade. We've really been working on all these fund balances. It takes a long time to build up not just this, but I think very shrewd investments. And once we actually hit $5 million, which we have, we can control our own way that we invest this as well. But just really for all of our reserve funds and our long-term funds, it's taken a long time to get here. And I think we will continue once all of our revenues change to build up anything that we've used. And I think this is a very healthy thing and policies that the town council has. I think we need to build them up even more than we have. So, and I think we will be able to do that as well. So,
right.
That's why, the public really needs to know that it has been, we get this perception of Yountville's rich. Well, Yountville just puts its nuts away, as I like to say.
I agree. It's probably at least a decade that multiple councils have shown discipline in doing this, having forward thinking and being willing to make sometimes difficult decisions for the long-term good. And so every year we talk about not putting future councils in a difficult position when we can do something about it today. So thank you also for calling that out. Okay, let's keep going. We got PERS next.
All right, and if Fund 2 wasn't confusing enough, here's Fund 3. So this is our PERS UAAL account, and UAAL stands for Unfunded Actuarially Accrued Liability. So the purpose of this fund is actually very similar to Fund 2, but where Fund 2 is about funding retiree health benefits. Fund 3, this fund is about funding retiree pension costs, so, all of our retirees' pension costs. So there's also two major costs associated with this fund. The first one is funding the actual UAAL amount, and then the second one is also an annual contribution to the reserve fund, which again, like Councilmember Moeller and Mayor Dunbar was saying, we've been doing over the many years. So the second side of that coin, the annual contribution, we are also keeping that on. We're not doing any additional contributions for fiscal year 21-22, but we do still have to make our UAAL payment. And this is an amount that's calculated by PERS just based off of our employees and what tiers they're in. I can go into more depth if we want about that.
No, I think the key here is to, again, recognize that we were advancing significantly the obligation payments. And so that's in large part why we were able to pause during the crisis of the pandemic, and continuing to pay the baseline obligation, but just pausing on the advance payment, just so people are clear on that. Councilmember Dornbecker?
Yeah, excuse me. I just wanted to point out that the trusts that we've set up were really a brilliant stroke, because they are all producing income also for those accounts. So, you know, for 10 years, we've really done a good job.
Yeah, exactly. So for this year, and it's only for 9 months of this fiscal year through March 2021, we've gained about $460,000 in interest earnings, you know, to Councilmember Dornbecker's point. So even though the UAAL amount that, again, we have no control over, it's the PERS amount, it did increase 17%. So last year was about 276,000. This year it's the 324,000. Again, thankfully that's offset a bit by our interest earnings. Well, more than a bit. It's covered by our interest earnings. So, so that is pretty much it for Fund 3. Any questions?
I don't see any more. We can keep going.
All right. So Emergency Reserve Fund 4. This reserve was set up for whenever the town declares a state, federal, or local emergency. And the town's policy for this is to maintain a minimum of 20% of our planned general fund expenditures. So as of February 28th of this year, the fund has about $2.04 million in it. And the town has not withdrawn any of these funds at all or during the COVID pandemic. And this amount, we are not planning on drawing anything from here. We're going to be drawing from the next reserve fund, which is Reserve Fund 5, our Revenue Stabilization Fund. So for this one, it has the same fund balance as of February 28th. And this one was established to ensure that the town could respond to any unexpected drop in tourism-based revenue, because our TOT revenue is over 60% of our general fund revenue. So it's awesome that we have these reserves set aside. And our policy for this one is to set the minimum for this reserve at 25% of our expected TOT revenue. So to date, we still, like we discussed earlier, we still have not withdrawn any amounts from this fund. However, to cover some revenue losses due to COVID, we're estimating about $200,000 to be withdrawn this fiscal year, which that's actually great news, because that's $800,000 less than what we were expecting. And then for next fiscal year, we're budgeting and we're anticipating $150,000 to be drawn. And of course, this reserve will replenish over time as our revenues stabilize.
Thank you.
Any questions about that one?
So Vice Mayor has a question about either Fund 4 or Fund 5.
It's sort of a question about both. Why are we not drawing what we need out of the emergency fund? Because those dollars are heavily restricted. It has to be a declared emergency. And the other dollars, the revenue stabilization, we have flexibility in how we use them. So why would we not use our emergency fund dollars right now when we truly have an emergency? Because there's not a lot of opportunity to use them, and this is that opportunity. So I was just wondering about the reasoning on that.
Happy to share that. The policy is, and I would say that the way we looked at this, Vice Mayor, is our revenue loss is in TOT. And the intent of the Revenue Stabilization Fund was to recognize that we may have ups and downs in our TOT. So we're very fortunate that we have both buckets. You are correct about that, but the point here is the connection to the direct revenue that is being lost. Certainly, if the council wanted to change the direction and request that we move from the emergency reserve fund, that could be done if that was your consensus direction. But there is a direct nexus as to why we're pulling from the Revenue Stabilization Fund, and that is due to the TOT derivation.
And I'll just add real quickly to that, Vice Mayor, that we are receiving federal and state emergency dollars that are helping fund what we would be pulling out of the emergency reserve. If we were not receiving those funds, I think we probably would be tapping in to the emergency reserve specifically. Is that an accurate statement, Kyle? Or Steve? Whoever unmutes first.
I'll let Steve
Okay.
answer that.
This is really the funding from the, we're receiving 580,000 in total over 2 fiscal years. We've had collectively between the last 2 fiscal years over 5 million in TOT loss. Again, if the council would prefer that we draw it from the emergency reserve fund, you're not going to get opposition from the finance director or I. But the reason, you asked a good question, Vice Mayor, but our rationale to drawing from the revenue stabilization is that fund was specifically established and tied to TOT, recognizing the volatility. But again, that's a council discretion as to which of the 2 funds you would prefer to draw from.
Well, I would
So
like to.
Question, sorry, I don't think I got an answer to my question, which was we're receiving funds that are restricted to emergency losses or costs that could not be used for revenue loss, correct?
Actually, revenue loss is a backfilling from documented revenue loss is a eligible expense for the revenue.
Not from the CARES Act funding.
No, it is actually.
That's what I'm talking about.
It is.
But the 540, 550 we're getting from the American Rescue Plan, that can cover lost revenue, correct?
Correct.
Yes, that's more flexible.
I'm just saying, why don't we use the less flexible plan? Because yes, TOT is down, but it's tied to an emergency. And maybe this isn't the time for this discussion, but to me, use the less flexible plans, get, as you're saying, Mayor, money in our coffers that we can use however we need to.
And actually, I'm going to say, if you want to, this is the time so that we can make the budget adjustments.
Councilmember Mueller?
I think we're really just having a bit of a semantic, discussion. I don't really think this emergency fund is really that restrictive as you might think. First of all, it's just a policy decision by the council rather than not being able to tap into that money, that we could, dump all of that money into the same revenue stabilization. We can just do that by a quick policy decision. And we also, by our policy, have the ability to actually call an emergency ourselves. For example, if we had a big earthquake and the town hall fell in or something like that, that could be an emergency that probably doesn't have anything to do with revenue. So they're really just kind of names I think the idea is to just have, you know, multiple buckets instead of one big bucket. So I think it's probably more flexible than you might think, is the way I kind of look at it. So
I'm reading to that point. I'm reading in the budget document we're looking at here that the use of funds from the Emergency Reserve Fund 4 would be appropriate if the town declared a state, federal, or local emergency
right.
as defined by our municipal code. I do see that as more than just a policy decision. I see the minimum 20% balance being a policy, flexible policy decision, but I do think there is some restriction to declaring an emergency. Yes, we have the ability to declare one for a variety of reasons. It does not have to match a state or national emergency. So I do think there's some semantics happening. If it's from the blue money or the red money, I don't think it matters. The fact that we have two funds, I agree with the finance department and the town managers analysis that we lost revenue, and this is the revenue revitalization bucket, so it makes sense there. If we had catastrophic emergency expenses, then I would agree with the vice mayor that that's where that money should come from, and it feels like it's different than the loss of revenue that we're trying to backfill. So I feel like it's fine as is. Again, it's colors of money. We're very fortunate that we have the money. Whether it comes from one line item or another one, I don't see it really making that much difference. You could probably make the same argument the vice mayor is making about emergency fund flexibility or restriction as with the revitalization. We could argue lost revenue based on other circumstances that may not be state or national emergencies also.
Agreed, but
let me go to, we have hands raised. Let me go to Councilmember Dornbecker and then Councilmember Knight.
We created the policy.
Yeah, I understand.
Right?
But, Councilmember Moeller, I'm going to the hands raised right now. Councilmember Dornbecker and then Councilmember Knight. Then we can come back.
Thank you. I just want to confirm that this fund is a restricted fund. So the restrictions placed upon it, even by our design, the restrictions exist, so we have to go with what the restrictions say. Is that correct?
Yes, unless council changes policy, absolutely.
Thank you.
There is some flexibility within the restrictions is what we're talking about though. Yeah. Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Mayor. So I looked at these two funds and they were it's a little bit confusing as one is for to cover operating and the other is for revenue. But to the vice mayor's point, is there a possibility that, I'm sorry, I'm scrolling through this, we have a 20% a minimum of 20% fund operating, general fund operating expenses. It seems to me, is there enough flexibility in the policy on Fund 4 to at least have staff or the finance department have access to any dollar amount above the minimum balance for that fund? So it looks like to me we have over maybe $200,000 that could be used for funding of operating expenses during this emergency, a state and local emergency, and at least use those funds down to the minimum balance in the fund.
So let me just make a proposal before we go deeper down this rabbit hole. Can we split the two funds and cost share between the two? Does that solve the problem here?
I'm going to suggest one. Again, these are two buckets. We're very fortunate. We've shared the rationale. Either are eligible expenses in that regard. I do want to answer Council Member Knight's question because I want to bring you back. The adopted budget included a language because we have a policy waiver, because obviously if we were to draw down the $1 million as we had identified in the budget proposal, that would not allow us to meet the target. So you actually have adopted a policy that waives that, recognizing that if we were to use the revenue, we wouldn't meet the target, and then it identified a commitment to refund. Now you're seeing that we're talking in the range of 200,000 possibly this year, and hopefully 150 or less next year. Again, this is really, I've explained where we came from. Both are eligible to be used. The real, what we've done is to try to recognize it. The target reflects the TOT collection because that's the most volatile, and then the emergency reserve. Again, the council has set ideas.
Okay. So thank you, Steve. I get back to my question to the council. Does it solve the problem that we're going around and around, I believe, on this? If the council feels like it should not all come out of the revitalization fund 5 and a portion should come out of emergency fund 4, is that going to satisfy the majority of the council? If so, let's do it. Again, Councilmember Knight with his advanced technology. Thumbs up would also work, real thumbs up. Councilmember Moeller, so far we have 3 in agreement, and then I guess it's a question of what that dollar amount, if it allows us to satisfy our minimum fund balances that we have a policy to respect. Steve or Kyle, do we have a recommended number to come out of, transfer out of the fund 5 into the fund 4 for this?
We'll go back and look at the detail, because we're also going to have to go back and look at, this is the policy direction. We'll have to go back and look at how the distribution is used for the current fiscal year as well as the proposed fiscal year. It should not be a problem, but you'll see that at the next meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you for being willing to make some modifications there. Okay, I need to get my participant window back open. Okay, moving on to planning and building, it looks like.
Good morning. This is the Planning and Building Department budget, and the total budget is down about 6% from our estimated expenditures this fiscal year, and that's primarily due to a decrease in contract services contracts. And that is, and as you know, the department relies heavily on contract services to provide the specialized departmental services that we use from time to time. Over the last few years, we've been involved with the zoning and design ordinance update, and in the upcoming fiscal year, we will be jumping into a housing element update. So the first budget highlight notes that decrease due to the completion of the ZOTO update in July of this year. And then the other shows the money that we're budgeting for the housing element update. And we have $50,000 in this budget, but it's also important to note that we're hoping to receive $65,000 in grant funds for a LEAP grant that will help fund this housing element update. Thank you.
Okay. And just a time check, I'm hoping that we are able to get through the entire agenda in the next 45 to 50 minutes, just to keep that in mind. Again, we have to discuss what we have to discuss, but I just want to make that point. Okay, public safety.
For public safety, for law enforcement, the budget calls for a 2.35% increase, which is approximately $27,000 in accordance to the 4-year contract agreement.
And I have to say something for the first time. Property tax will actually cover our public safety expense. So I have to change one of my notations. This will be the first time in my tenure that that is true statement.
Thank you.
Right, and next we have fire and emergency medical services. This budget reflects a decrease of $42,000, almost $43,000 in estimated costs for operations and maintenance.
Okay.
Public Works, this is the Public Works section, and it covers all of the general fund budget units within the Public Works Department. A snapshot of all of our operating fund budgets. As you can see, the majority are either flat or down, with one small exception, which we will talk about as we go through this. Basically, we're just it's a flat budget if you look at it in total, just slightly up about $1,000 over year to year, 21 to 22. So next slide, please. Expected revenues for $13,000, and that's collected through our encroachment permits, tree removal, and some engineering service charges when we are working with planning and development. The budget highlights for admin and engineering, 4301. It's decreased by about $25,000 or 3.5%. Our contract services budget remains flat. Other agencies' budget is decreased $10,500. This reflects the requirement that we had with our Measure A project on Hopper Creek for a 5-year monitoring program. That program is now getting closed out as we speak. So that $10,500 reflects that line item being complete and the removal of that part of the budget. Savings in other agencies' line items is offset and in part increased because of the allocated IT costs that Human Resources Manager and Risk Manager, IT Manager, Julie Baldea talked about earlier. I think we're going to have a little look at our Public Works Administration and Engineering online budget.
Maybe this will be the last one we look at just for the sake of time, but I do encourage the council and all viewers to click those links within the staff reports and check out the online budget. Lots of data here, a little bit of program revenues coming in, and then we also have in most departments the staff allocations, so you can see how the FTEs are split out, and then a little organizational chart to give a little bit more data about how that department operates.
All right, continuing on with our Public Works budget units, streets maintenance. This budget is slightly increased from 2021 by about $3,000 or slightly less than 1%. Personnel costs are lower, as we discussed very early in this presentation, and a decrease in contract services is slightly offset by an increase in facilities maintenance. So it's basically about a push. We reduced it 10,000, but we increased the facilities maintenance by I think 4,000 or 5,000. So basically a push on those line items. Next slide, please. Parks maintenance, again, a slight decrease, largely attributed to our successful budgeting for waste disposal and recycling costs, which are now part of the franchise agreement. Thank you very much, Councilmember Mueller, for negotiating that and getting that deal done. We do have an increase in allocated IT costs, but it didn't affect the budget all that much. Next slide, please. Government buildings. So this budget is up a bit, 6%. The increase of 4,000 in contract services is again offset almost exactly by our not having the budget for waste disposal and recycling costs, which again are entirely borne on the new franchise agreement. There was a slight increase in allocated property insurance. There was also a fairly significant increase in the allocated IT costs of somewhere in the neighborhood of, it was just a little bit more than $11,000, which is really where the two cost increases are almost entirely the result of this increase in the budget, along with some personnel increases. And then we have the loan from the Energy Resources Conservation Commission, and that loan will be scheduled to be final payment December of next year. I'm happy to answer any questions you have on the Public Works budgets.
Thank you. I just want to recognize the fact that, again, we are in a very enviable position to actually continue public works capital projects in a time when most are not. And so thank you, Joe, and to your entire team for continuing to execute on some significant projects, some anticipated and at least one not as anticipated with the repaving in Washington Park. So
absolutely, Mayor, and I would say based on what we've been reading in the paper, the fact that we're doing it with a full, complete staff, the staff we started with before the pandemic, we're at that same number. So if you look at other agencies around us, there have been drastic reductions, not backfilling positions that have opened through retirement or other reduction in force. So we're very, very fortunate to be where we're at, given the state of the economy and the pandemic in general. So yeah, we'll take that as a win, and thank you all for all the work you've done to get us in this position, because it certainly is enviable by many.
That's why this is Public Works Month. I do not see any hands, so we can move on. I just want to acknowledge now, so I don't forget, because Michelle would remind me, we do have a public comment that has been submitted for the Park and Recs section. We can hear the report from Samantha first, and then that and any other public comment that may have been received.
Good morning, thank you. So this is a snapshot overview of the Parks and Recreation General Department or General Fund Department revenues. And so as you can imagine, as we head into more normalcy out of pandemic, we're being cautious on the recovery of our revenues. So some of our estimates are down from previous years, and so that is just mainly based on a slow recovery with some changes in some areas. And of course, if we are surprised by the recovery effort and we do see increases in revenue, that would be a pleasant surprise as either we go into the mid-year or in the budget preparation for next year. So just a quick snapshot, things that look like significant decreases. So in the admin and services, it's not a huge dollar amount, but is large in percentage. And that's mainly made up of our special event permitting and park picnic site rentals. We do anticipate those two things remaining a little bit down. Summer camp revenue remaining pretty constant with a little bit of an increase. We are anticipating the community center revenue down as again, recovery to in-person events. The after-school program, as school resumes in the fall, we are not anticipating a need for that program as it is offered right now. We are looking at offering the out-of-school day program. So when school has a day off that's not technically a national holiday, we will offer gap care for parents. Leisure program down a little as we resume in-person programming and as well as sports, a slight decrease in community events and slight decrease in Yountville Arts. Next slide. Overall for the department, that is about a 14% decrease in revenue from the estimates for this year, this current fiscal year. So under expenses, our estimated expenses are just under 1.4 million. This is a decrease of about 14% from last year's budget, and that is mainly attributed to part-time staffing decreases as we analyze the budget for, again, that kind of slow return to in-person programming and events. We're being conservative on where we would need staffing, part-time staffing mainly. So under admin and services, we see a decrease in part-time staffing. We've also implemented a 2 times a year recreation guide for this fiscal year, which is a cost savings for printing and postage. We see a decrease again in the after-school line item, and that is generally mostly made up of part-time staffing costs as we change that program. Under sports, again, for staffing. So overall, you'll see a 14% decrease in our budget over the past fiscal year's estimated or approved budget. So as I stated, major changes in our department is really that anticipated slow recovery for those in-person programs and events, and that's reflected in both our revenue and our expense. So further reduction in service levels for the after-school program that I noted, as well as some redistribution of staffing allocations. So mainly for after school, we have a recreation coordinator that was allocated to that position, which we're redistributing as he will be changing his program workload. And then again, as I noted, the reduction in the rec guide to 2 per year. Next slide. So these are just some highlights. I'll just pick one, not go into a lot of detail on that. The reduction in part-time staffing I noted, as well as we discussed last night, in the addition in our admin budget for the contract services for a consultant for the master planning process. Camp, we have some savings for facility rental and not taking field trips again this summer. Next slide. Community center, we have the reduction in the waste disposal and recycling expenses due to the new franchise agreement, which is great. Already discussed after school. Leisure programs, we reflect a decrease in expenses as we have a slow return to excursions. We know when we hear that that's a very important thing to come back online, so we're working on that, but still will be less than we've offered in the past. Under leisure programs 5410, we've also updated full-time staffing allocations there that actually better reflect the actual staff time investment. Next slide. So under community events 5413, we will not be offering fireworks again this July 4th as we come out of the pandemic and also have a heightened increase in interest and want to be conservative with anything that could potentially light fires. We think it's a good year to assess fireworks and of course looking at 2022, we'll definitely be looking at that again. And also we're continuing with a modified residence bash for 21. And that's mainly, as we know, we most likely will be able to hopefully safely gather, but because that event was so heavily reliant on our businesses to give sponsorships and donate support, we feel like working with the chamber on more of a revised event model that would get our residents out into our businesses to support them coming out of the pandemic is what we are focusing on. So we will not be having the in-person residence bash this fall. And then under Yountville Arts, something that comes up every year is, well, how much does the general fund support Yountville Arts? So under this year's budget, the proposed general fund support is just over $20,000. Past years have varied from $12,000 to $18,000 to $24,000. So going into this year, we're looking at just over $20,000. And then in the current year, expenditures are significantly above budgeted estimates, and that's due to art sales. So we have sold more sculptures in the past year than we have in the 11 years that I've been here overseeing the art walk. And so there is an increased revenue, which is matched by an increased expenditure, but the Yountville Arts Commission does earn 20% commission on each sale, which goes to offset their costs as well. And I think that's my last slide. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, and then I know we do have the one public comment.
Right, and I did just want to recognize before I go to the Vice Mayor that it's amazing we have any revenue at all. And it's also amazing how you manage to adjust online and to provide virtual experiences and also some in-person safe programs and recreational activities, given we're operating in a global pandemic and multiple wildfires. So again, amazing work to be able to continue to provide any programming and services for our community. You know, I would have expected no revenue at all. So being down, you know, large percentages is not really shocking at all. Vice Mayor?
Thank you. Thank you, Director Holland. Yes, and speaking of all the work you do, my question is about the Town of Yountville Community Foundation, which you also assist. How does it how do the funds in the Community Foundation intersect with the funds in this 5415? How do those go together, or do they?
So they don't really go together. The Town of Yountville Community Foundation obviously operates totally separate from the town's finances, but so we have money coming into that account, generally speaking. So whenever, so all of these art sales, the 20% that the commission that they receive would then transfer into their foundation account at the end of the fiscal year. So any money they make over what we've agreed on as the expenses would then transfer to the foundation into their savings, which is something that they draw down on for special projects. So they have approved expenditure out of the foundation for the underpass mural, as we need to have the new PG&E, or excuse me, Caltrans doors painted. So that's a project that would be spent out of there. So because the foundation's not set up to accept payments or sales, we run those art sales through the Town of Yountville coffers, I should say, and then the revenue, the net revenue moves into the foundation at the end of the fiscal year.
And so the 19 or 20,000 for the general fund, that's sort of seed money or gap filler money.
Yeah, so that money really goes to support those kind of ongoing programs like the gallery at the community center, and any type of, there is some part-time staffing support. We don't allocate full-time staffing to them at this point, but they do have some part-time staffing support that's allocated to them. Oh, actually, we do have some of Danielle Zoller's time is allocated to them. So some of that, last year we really tried, when we created this 5415, is kind of a more transparent view of what the arts general fund, you know, and staff time goes to that. You're not charged, it's not charged my staff time, but we do have some of our facility event specialists and part-time staffing that goes to that too. So yeah, that's just kind of that, you know, over money. It doesn't, all of the art fund, we're going to go into that next. All of the art walk expenses come out of a different fund, the designated fund. So that comes out separately as well.
And Vice Mayor, you're spot on. There are a handful of arts commission events, literary events, et cetera, that are not a revenue producing, and that operating cost goes to help offset the production costs. And as the director pointed out, the support staff for setting those events up.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Councilmember Dornbecker and then to the public comment.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Holland, for your report, and thank you for so much work that you do. I had a question, which is that, you know, the annual birthday bash is a very, very popular event for the residents in town. And I was wondering, what is the rationale for being able to bring back music in the park, but not have the annual bash for the residents? Or could we combine some sort of music in the park with a party for the residents that would take the place of? And I think Steve is getting ready to answer this question with a, yeah, I should ask.
No, it's a good, and I think it's not that we necessarily couldn't. The resident bash required a great level of investment and commitment and volunteering from our restaurants and tasting rooms. And we consulted and just made with them, and we made a determination that a August event, one is, they're still recovering. So for them to contribute to this event would potentially be an offset. So we felt trying to do something where we recognize them and worked on increasing that and then bringing it back in its regular format next year. To your point though, we are moving forward. You know, concerts in the park are moving forward. They will have a food truck component, but we're hopeful that people will get out and engage. But that was the policy thinking behind the director and I in terms of where we were at, and we also consulted with the chamber, and they felt that that was a good rationale, because it's just, you know, we're trying to get them going, and then that's, I mean, that's our explanation for the nuance between the two events.
And
Thank
it's
you.
also coming out of the pandemic, you know, we do have places in, it's a little different setup at Music in the Park than it would be at the Residence Bash, but we will still be marketing how, you know, like a bash celebration. It's just going to look differently. And part of that marketing could be, you know, come to the August 22nd Music in the Park. And during that week, we, you know, encourage you to visit, you know, our local businesses. And I'm working with Whitney on what exactly that might look like. Although we're not asking the businesses to give any type of discount or anything, we are encouraging them to do something special that week for residents. That's obviously not free, but encouraging our residents to really continue supporting our businesses as we come out, and then really pushing for next year to have the same bash type format.
Well, the one of the things that the residents love about the bash is that it's for them, it's not for the businesses. And it was very nice that the businesses did help out. And I don't think that our residents would be offended if we, you know, said, hey, let's do the Music in the Park on August 22nd and bring your own picnic lunch, because why not? You know, and still we'll have music and you can dance, and we'll be, you know, safely doing the get together. But I just feel like, you know, it's taking the residents out of the bash, and we appreciate the businesses, but I have a feeling it's not going to be as popular as if it were actually a residents bash, just to say, that's all.
So
Okay.
I have to acknowledge also, there's an apprehension by many. They don't want to be with 300 other people in a space, not yet. And we acknowledge that. And I think Steve makes a very valid point that actually part of the reason the bash is as successful as it is, it's almost free. We tried free, and then people didn't bother to even show up after they reserved spaces. So now it's what, $10? The only reason it's $10 is because all of our businesses donate their time, their staff, and their products. They are now coming out of a year-long shutdown, and I think it's unreasonable to expect them in the middle of August, which is also supposed to be the busiest time of the year, to have this kind of participation expected. Everyone is allowed to bring a picnic basket to Music in the Park and movies in the park and everything else. They don't need guidance from the town. We will continue to provide free and low-cost services to our residents. That's what we do. But there needs to be an understanding. We can't do everything as normal this year.
I understand. I wasn't suggesting that we once again impose on our businesses. So thank you.
Are there any other points before we get to I think we can go to the public comment if it's just the one, or if there are any others that have come through, Michelle or Eddie?
Mayor, it's just the one public comment, and this is submitted by Pam Reeves, and I'll go ahead and start that. I'm interested in the council having a discussion about the budget for the Parks and Recreation Department. And looking at the proposed budget for 21-22, I am curious about the thought process over the past few years of not keeping the $93,000 dedicated to the swimming pool and its programs within the Parks and Recreation Department budget. I realize that the council did not have any control over the loss of the pool agreement. That is not part of the discussion. The budget for Parks and Rec has been declining or static over the last few years. In fact, the expenditure for the pool and swimming program completely evaporated instead of being reinvested into other programs within the Parks and Recreation Department. This is where I think we need to be vigilant in making sure the community is not shortchanged. Why, if one recreation program is closed, do we not use that previously earmarked money to create other programs or improve facilities to offer alternative recreation? A pool is a highly valued community resource. Perhaps we could create a fund with that historic annual $93,000 budget entry and save to provide a pool on an alternate property in town in order to serve the residents. A pool is a valuable resource for all age groups, recommended for aging and disabled people as a low impact form of exercise, and valued by families as a fun form of play and exercise for children as well. If we do not provide these types of amenities to our residents, we stand to lose even more children and families from town, And if we are interested in a healthy community, we need to invest in ways for residents to stay healthy or get more fit. And since we have a high percentage of senior residents, swimming offers rehabilitation and easy exercise for people with mobility issues. I would ask council to consider a fund to save for a new in-town pool using the money that previously went to the use and maintenance of the vet's home pool. I understand that there were few takers for the pool vouchers offered when the pool was closed to town residents, but that is to be expected. It is not convenient and not an easy part of our community life to commute to a pool that might have even more restrictive hours than the vet's home pool. But that does not mean that residents are not interested in a pool that is highly accessible and within walking distance. At the very least, council should consider reinvesting that sum back into the Parks and Recreation Department in order to provide additional programs or facilities for residents to stay fit and healthy. Recently, the mayor announced our inclusion into a group dedicated to increasing the health, well-being, and happiness of people within its association. This would be a great step towards making that happen. Let's not continue to let these things slip under the radar. We need to balance how we spend our money so that residents continue to benefit directly from their favorite services provided by the Parks and Recreation investments. Thank you for hearing my concerns again from Pam Reeves. And that concludes the public comments.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'll invite Samantha to provide factual information about the use of the pool, the subsidy that the town used to provide annually for the pool, and the resident participation in the pool, not just about after the pool was shut down and vouchers were given by the town to any resident that wanted to go elsewhere. Could you provide some information?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have the specific numbers and statistics in front of me, but the town did heavily subsidize the pool at its highest rate of operation. The pool was being subsidized, if I recall correctly, almost 70% by the town's general fund for regular operating costs. And again, that was seasonal. The pool was only open for about 3 months every year. And the majority of the use that we saw were non-residents. I believe it was less than 25% of our use each year was from residents of the town of Yountville. And so the agreement with the Veterans Home was decided to be dissolved based on some changes going up there at the Veterans Home, as well as some pending capital improvements that were coming very quickly as the infrastructure there was declining rapidly. And so, you know, pools are tricky and they don't make money. And we did analysis at the time as far as what area pools, a few of our associations that we have condensed living have pools on site that are available to those living in those communities here in Yountville, and the number of private pools, and then the pools in our area. We did quite a bit of research on that. At the time, the expense did just go, you know, back to the general fund. It's not something that we were paying for any longer, although at the time we did reallocate the full-time staffing costs into other areas. We have since have a position that has not been full when Lisa Tyler did retire, and so there is the staffing that was associated with running that facility is not currently available in our department anymore. I think. And
if I remember correctly, was it a couple $100,000 that we were subsidizing the pool? Does that sound correct, Samantha?
Yeah, it would be approaching 200,000, I believe. Yeah, and the capital improvement costs that were coming up were close to 400,000 to 500,000, I believe.
Right. That's what I remember as well. And also every year we had a very difficult time even getting lifeguards. I remember for the last many years to operate at the pool, correct?
Yeah, that was becoming an issue and it still is regionally, yeah.
Okay. Steve, did you want to add something further?
I was just going to clarify your numbers. It was ranging between 150 and 180 in terms of the subsidy. And we were looking at, and I do want to remind everybody, you have the initial capital investment. 10 years ago, the town put over $3 million into renovations of the existing veterans home pool. And I could check with Calistoga, which 2 years ago built a new pool, but they do have a significant upfront investment cost if that is something. I also think the timing's interesting because it could be something that as we go through adopted a process for the Park and Rec master planning, certainly that's not going to be at a point this year, but that topic would be relevant for that process as it moves forward.
Okay, thank you. So I believe that takes care of our Parks and Recreation section and the General Fund Department analysis as a whole. Is that correct? Yes.
Yes.
So I see. Moving on to special revenue funds.
Correct. Thank you, Mayor. This is our Public Education and Government Fund. This is a restricted fund for PEG fees, and we utilize those funds. We have a contract with Napa Valley TV, who provides staff for operating our cameras. They also are involved in modernizing our equipment and updating it every few years as needed. We currently do not have any expected expenditures, but we do use $5,000 as a placeholder in case there are system failures or some new piece of equipment that we might need to make operations more smooth. And again, just a reminder, this is a restricted fund, and if the funds are not used, they remain within this Fund 21. And that concludes my report on this item. And thank you to...
We're just gonna keep cranking through here.
Okay.
If I see a hand, I'll let you know. Otherwise, we're gonna just move quickly.
So this is the Public Art Program Fee Fund, and I referenced this earlier. It's used exclusively for the Art Walk. And just to note that in 2019, the Commission did set an administrative policy to retain a fund balance of at least $40,000, and that would support 2 years of the Art Walk under its normal operation in the event of a commercial building permit downturn. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Hello, so this is the Housing Grant Fund, and this fund is used to fund the Housing Rehabilitation Program, which funds home improvement projects for low-income eligible residents to bring their homes up to current building codes. This fund has a budget of $520, and that is anticipation of receiving the funds from an award granted in 2019. We are still waiting for the state to issue those contracts and award those funds, but we do expect that to happen this year. It's also important to note that this is a revolving loan program, which allows us to utilize the grant funds to finance as many rehabilitation projects as possible. And to date, we've funded 39 projects. And what's interesting about this year is that it includes one tenant-based rental assistance recipient, and that was the program put in place to help tenants with rent payments due to COVID. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for calling that out. It was a very unique situation that became very beneficial. Again, supporting local. That's great. Thank you.
And I would also say, for the council's benefit, we are continuing to work with the housing authority to identify additional renters that may be eligible. So we're hopeful that there could be 4 or 5 more that we're working with, principally through Napa Valley Community Housing.
And that's still residential only, correct? Not commercial?
That is correct.
Right. Okay, thank you. Fire emergency.
So there is no budget for this fund. The revenues received are just transferred to offset the cost of fire, and we currently have a balance of $30.
Hold it close. Okay, next.
Joe, did you want to take this one, or I'll just jump in and take this one. This is the CAS Certification and Training Fund. Total expenditures are estimated at $1,700, and by expenditures we mean transfer into Capital Projects Fund 50 to be put towards ADA projects. The revenue generated in this fund comes from the processing of new and renewed business licenses. And this is a restricted fund that was mandated by the state so that we could collect funds, send a portion to the state, and then keep a portion to use for ADA projects.
This is the Housing Opportunity Program, and it was established to support the development of affordable housing units here in town. Some of the budget highlights are that we have $13,400 budgeted to support housing advocacy groups that we work with, and those are listed here. This is a program that's noted in our town's general plan, and so we're obligated to provide these funds in that manner. We also have $50,000 budgeted to continue with our contracts with City of Napa Housing Authority, and as you know, they manage our affordable housing services in town. This fund receives revenue from developer-paid housing fair share impact fees, and we do not budget any revenue based on that because it depends on projects, and we know that this is a declining revenue stream. And it includes, in this upcoming budget, a transfer of over $70,000 from the general fund in order to fund these necessary housing programs. Thank you.
Sandra, do you want to continue on with this one?
Sure, I'll just simply share what's on this slide. This is the Measure S Affordable and Workforce Housing Fund, and there's a budget of $100,000 earmarked for this study that is noted, and we expect to collect approximately $437,000 in this upcoming fiscal year, and the fund balance is currently at $928,000, which you heard last night.
Thank you. Youth subsidy. Samantha, I cannot hear you.
Here I am. This was transitioned to the Town Yountville Community Foundation, so it's just here for historic purposes.
Thank you. Talent Lane.
Sandra, you're muted.
Thank you. This is the Talent Lane Benefit District and the Mesa Court Drainage District, and we show the fund balance for each of those here. We don't budget any revenue because it depends on projects to bring in those impact fees.
All right. Thank you. Moving on to custodial fund. Yes, Celia.
I think Julie will be taking this one.
Okay.
Actually,
I believe Steve is, unless.
Okay, Steve, you do it.
Real quickly, the Tourism Improvement District, it collects a 2% TOT, and 1.5% is collected and then transferred to the Napa Valley Tourism Incorporation, and the last 0.5% is stayed for a local, now a local Yountville-based TID board, and there is also a provision for a small allocation back for us being the fiduciary agent for the TID. So at this point, revenues are expected at 877. Of that amount, 647, some will be passed to the county, 218,000 will stay local. As you noted, we did a budget amendment a couple council meetings ago. They do have a healthy fund balance, and they'll be working on projecting their budget, which will likely be a status quo or slightly increased for marketing. And they have a separate body that approves their expenditures and budget. And again, the town simply serves as their fiduciary entity.
Right, thank you. I'm going to ask Michelle or Eddie if we have any public comment on the special revenue funds or the custodial fund, but also want to recognize that the TID has also been supporting additional public relations and marketing with the town and the Yountville Chamber to help the economic recovery. They've acknowledged the additional support is necessary. So I want to acknowledge the TID is working hard to support. Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Mayor. Quickly, on line 4990, just a quick explanation for community outreach and promotion and what those funds are used for. And you may have just answered that, Mayor, a minute ago. So
I think I did.
Okay. Specifically, what type of community outreach and promotion do we typically use those funds for? Thank you.
Specifically, there was money contributed for online marketing and promotion. Steve, if you had a specific answer.
Well, when we say community outreach and marketing, it can include programs, advertising, marketing. So some of that is the local campaigns and then broader. So this particular body is focused more on social media and targeting the region for Yountville. So that's been a big focus.
And I think it's a different line item, but I think, they were also supporting the lights for the holiday season and some of those other seasonal activities.
Correct. The TID has a budget for the lighting. They support that. They also have a support for some of the small, they provided grants to the Lincoln Theater, the Napa Valley Museum, Divine Trail, and also they support with a small grant the Art Sip and Stroll event. So that is some of their community outreach as well. Thank you for the reminder.
And Mayor, we do not have any new public comments at this time.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions from council, let's move on to debt service funds.
The debt service funds, these are pretty straightforward. Both funds 52 and 53 are only shown in this budget for historical data. Fund 52 was created for the bond related to the town center project, and that was refinanced in 2017. That refinance saved the town about 1.6 million of interest over the life of the bond. And now the payments related to servicing this refinance bond is shown in Fund 54. And so for Fund 54, the total costs for next fiscal year will be about $542,000. And then Fund 53 was created for the bond related to Town Hall Madison Yacht Project. And that one was refinanced in 2020. And this refinance saved the town about $51,000 of interest over the life of the bond. And now the payments related to servicing this refinance bond is in Fund 55. And the total for next budget year will be about $349,000. And then the last one, Measure A, Fund 77, is only shown in the budget for historical purposes as well, as it is now closed. And the remaining balance was moved to the Flood Barrier Capital Maintenance Fund in fiscal year 18-19.
All right, thank you. Impact fees.
So you see here the different impact fees noted on the title block of this page, and there is no impact or no budget for the impact fee revenue. And that's a current practice that we carry over from year to year due to the fact that development is limited in number and difficult to predict. And it does represent a declining source of funding based on the fact that town is principally built out.
Thank you.
Right.
Next steps.
So next steps will be to finalize these few little action items that were outlined by council. Just real quickly, in the non-departmental department, we're going to check on the accomplishments section and make sure that's correct. In community promotions, we're going to add $3,000 for the small projects grant program. Julie's going to look into and send some more detailed information for risk management contract services. And then the finance department is going to look into splitting the usage of the emergency reserve and revenue stabilization reserve funds to see if we can do that and still meet the policy minimum. And we will bring that information back to budget workshop number 3, which will be May 19th at 9:30 a.m. And we will cover the funds listed here under agenda.
Great, thank you for that summary. I'm also going to remind folks that any questions from the public can be submitted by publiccomment@wyville.com. If there's anything that following this workshop that you have questions about or want to provide comments prior to our next budget meeting, which is on the 19th, as was just stated. Any final questions from the council before we adjourn? Councilor Dornbecker, are you leaning in? Okay.
I just wanted to please remind the staff to send us the slides from this presentation. Thank you.
I will do that. Thank you.
Also add to the council, we will provide this whole presentation and post it on the town's website as well.
Great. Thank you very much. And I believe that takes care of our business for today. Again, part of the reason for my trying to get us out of here a little bit ahead of time is our town staff is being recognized by the Yountville Chamber of Commerce in 10 minutes. And I want them to be able to actually receive that recognition and honor. So thank you all for being efficient. And while we needed to take time to discuss several things, that's what we're here for. But also I want our town staff to be recognized for the incredible work they've done always, but especially this last year, uninterrupted service to our community. So thanks to each and every one of you for that. We are going to adjourn to our next, well, not even, to our planning retreat, which is Tuesday, May 18th. And I don't have the time in front of me, but let's see, where is it? 9 a.m. on Tuesday, May 18th, and then we'll have another budget meeting on the 19th. So
actually, Mayor, it'll be an 8:30 a.m. start.
Okay, 8:30 on Tuesday, May 18th.
You have, you know, your survey information and everything.
Okay, we're good.
We're
good. And Michelle, I think Councilmember Dornbecker made the motion and Councilmember Knight seconded to adjourn. And it was unanimous that we're adjourning.
Thank you.
With that, thank you, everyone. Thank you for all the hard work to get us to this point.
Thank you very much.
Have a
Thanks
great day.
all. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.